A champion biker vanished into the mountains with his 14-year-old son for years. They were nowhere to be found as the search for them went on and on and on. But on the seventh year, some hikers found their bikes carefully parked in between the rocks, and this discovery would unravel the truth behind their disappearance. I want you to sit back, grab your favorite drink and snack, and enjoy this story as it unfolds. They said Benson couldn't be beaten, and for years no one proved them wrong. In the city's biking world, Benson was not just a name, it was a warning. Race after race, season after season, he finished first. Gold medals lined the walls of his home like quiet witnesses to his dominance. Rivals came and went, younger and hungrier each year, but the outcome never changed. Benson always rode harder, smarter, cleaner. To some, he was inspiration. To others, he was an obstacle that refused to fall. With victory came resentment. Whispers followed him from race tracks to local bars. Anonymous threats surfaced, casual words masked as jokes, dark hints delivered through third parties. Benson heard them all and ignored them. In his mind, bitterness was the tax of success. He had faced competition his whole life, and fear had never earned him a medal. At home, however, Benson was not a champion. He was simply a father, and no one mattered more to him than Jordan, his first son. Jordan had grown up watching races from the sidelines, memorizing every move, every lean, every turn. He didn't ride with his father, not yet. Benson had made a promise long ago. When Jordan turned 14, training would begin. The day finally came. Jordan stood taller, eyes burning with excitement, dreams spilling out faster than words could hold. Benson saw himself in that look, the hunger, the belief, the innocence. When he placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder and told him it was time, it wasn't about biking anymore. It was legacy, trust, blood. Father and son began training together, side by side, unaware that the same reputation protecting Benson on the tracks was quietly placing a target on his back. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also share with your loved ones. Benson had ridden those mountains long before they became a destination for tourists and thrill seekers. The Smoky Mountains were not unfamiliar terrain to him. They were memory. Every curve, every incline, every narrow pass had been learned through years of discipline and repetition. He knew which paths became dangerous after rain, which bends swallowed sound, and which shortcuts only veterans dared to take. Getting lost was something that happened to strangers, not to Benson. That evening felt no different from countless others. Father and son prepared for what Benson called a routine ride, part training, part bonding, part escape from the noise of the city. Jordan followed closely, absorbing every instruction, every unspoken rule. Benson corrected his posture, adjusted his pace, and reminded him to respect the mountain, not challenge it. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the trees thickening, the world narrowing to dirt, breath, and movement. As daylight thinned, Benson made the decision to continue a little farther. He had done it before, many times. He knew exactly how long it would take to turn back. Jordan trusted him without question. To Jordan, his father wasn't just experienced, he was infallible. The sun dipped behind the ridges faster than expected. Shadows stretched across the trail, swallowing familiar markers. Still, Benson showed no concern. He had navigated worse in darker conditions under heavier pressure. He adjusted their route, confident in his sense of direction, certain the mountain would open up the way it always had. But night arrived without warning. The forest fell silent in a way that felt deliberate, almost watchful. When the hours passed and the trailhead remained empty, concern turned into unease. No lights appeared on the winding paths. No engines echoed back through the trees. By morning, the truth was impossible to ignore. Benson, a man who never miscalculated a ride, had vanished. And if Benson never got lost, then whatever happened in those mountains was never an accident. By morning, panic had replaced denial. Benson's wife had barely slept, packing between windows, refreshing the same hope with every passing hour. that she would hear the familiar sound of engines returning from the mountains. When dawn broke and silence remained, she drove straight to the police station. Her voice shook as she spoke their names, repeating them as if saying them enough times might pull them back into existence. Benson, Jordan, father and son, missing. The city reacted quickly at first. Officers spread across the Smoky Mountains, joined by rescue teams and volunteers who knew the trails almost as well as Benson himself. Search lights swept across cliffs and ravines. Dogs traced paths that led nowhere. Helicopters hovered over dense forest canopies, scanning for movement, color, anything that didn't belong. Every trail Benson was known to ride was combed inch by inch. But the mountains gave nothing back. There was no blood to suggest a fall, no torn clothing caught on branches, no helmets, no backpacks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Benson and Jordan had ridden straight into the earth and vanished. Days turned into weeks and hope thinned with each failed lead. The search expanded, then stalled, then quietly circled the same empty ground. As time passed, urgency faded into procedure. Fewer officers showed up each morning. Fewer volunteers returned. The questions became routine, the answers unchanged. The case moved from active search to open file, a silent shift no one announced out loud. The city watched as effort turned into obligation and obligation into distance. Benson's wife felt it most. The calls slowed. The updates grew vague. What had begun as a citywide emergency was now an unsolved disappearance tucked behind newer cases. 7 years passed, but time did not heal what uncertainty kept open. Benson's wife lived suspended between two unbearable realities. Some mornings she woke believing her husband and son were still alive, somewhere beyond reach, waiting for the right moment to return. Other days, grief crushed her chest with the weight of a goodbye that had never been spoken. She could not mourn them, and she could not move on. Silence had become her permanent companion. The city, however, did not stay silent. Stories filled the void left by the mountains. Some believed it was a tragic accident, one wrong turn, one unseen cliff, a mistake even a veteran could make. Others rejected that idea entirely. Benson did not make careless errors. To them, the disappearance smelled of foul play, of jealousy turned violent. A smaller but louder group believed something else altogether, that Benson had chosen to disappear, taking his son with him for reasons no one could understand. The debate split the city. Every race, every bar, every street corner echoed with speculation. People argued not just about what happened, but about who Benson really was: hero, victim, or man with secrets. Police eventually questioned Benson's fiercest rivals in the biking league, men who had lost titles, sponsorships, and pride to him year after year. They denied everything. No evidence tied them to the mountains. No witnesses placed them near the trail that night. The threats, once dismissed as rivalry, now lacked substance strong enough to hold anyone accountable. And so the case remained frozen in uncertainty. No arrests, no closure, just a family fractured, a city divided, and two names that refused to fade. After 3 years, the mountains still held their silence, and the truth seemed buried deeper than any trail could reach. 7 years after the mountains swallowed Benson and his son, the case had become a ghost story people told to newcomers. Then one afternoon, deep along a rarely used stretch of the trail, a group of bikers slowed to a stop. What caught their attention wasn't movement or sound, but metal where metal didn't belong. 2 bikes were wedged tightly between massive rocks, hidden from the main path as if the mountain itself had been instructed to keep them. Time had not been kind to them. Rust coated the frames. The tires had long lost their air. Leaves and dirt had settled into every joint. These bikes had not moved in years. The riders tried to pull them free, but the rocks held firm. The positioning was strange, too deliberate. Not twisted, not shattered. No signs of impact. Realizing the seriousness of what they had found, they contacted the authorities and waited. When the police arrived with a forensic team, the silence returned. The first assessment raised more questions than answers. The bikes were old but intact. No skid marks, no broken parts, no evidence of a crash. The handlebars were straight. The stands were down. To seasoned investigators, it looked wrong. These bikes weren't abandoned in panic. They weren't thrown aside after an accident. They were parked. Word spread quickly. Benson's wife was contacted and brought to the scene. When the call came, Benson's wife already knew what it meant. She had waited years for answers, but standing before the bikes made hope collapse under the weight of reality. The police led her carefully to where they had been found, wedged tightly between cold stone as if placed there with intention. The moment her eyes settled on them, her body gave in. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She simply broke. She collapsed into tears. She recognized every scratch, every modification. She recognized them instantly. The custom grip Benson refused to change. The faded stripe Jordan had insisted on adding himself. These weren't just bikes. They were proof that the past had been waiting all along. Her knees buckled, and for the first time in years, grief no longer had to share space with hope. Forensic teams worked methodically, but forensics could do little. Time had already done its damage. Weather had erased what answers remained. Rain, snow, heat, and dust had erased whatever clues once existed. No fingerprints remained. No fibers. No trace that could explain how two people vanished while their bikes stayed behind. The machines had outlived their riders, and now they told no stories. Yet something refused to sit right. Investigators exchanged quiet glances, drawn again and again to the same detail. The bikes were stable, balanced, protected by the rocks rather than destroyed by them. There were no signs of panic, no evidence of a fall, no struggle frozen in metal. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't an accident. As Benson's wife was escorted away, a realization settled heavily over the scene. Whatever happened in these mountains had been decided, not caused. Someone had stopped here, made a choice, and walked away, leaving behind just enough to be found, and just enough to confuse everyone who came after. The city was still trying to process the discovery of the bikes when the impossible happened. Benson returned, not as a name in an old case file or a face on fading posters, but as a living man standing beside his son. Jordan was taller now, broader, no longer the boy who had vanished into the mountains. They were alive. News spread faster than disbelief could keep up. Streets filled with voices raised in shock. Some cried with relief. Others demanded answers. Anger mixed with awe as the weight of 7 lost years came crashing down on a city that had already grieved them. People stared as if looking too long might make them disappear again. Benson looked older, worn by time, but steady. Jordan stayed close to him, silent, eyes alert, as though he had learned the cost of being seen. Their return didn't feel like rescue. It felt planned, controlled. Questions followed them everywhere. Where had they gone? How had they survived? Why now, after the bikes were found, after hope had finally begun to die? For Benson's wife, the moment was unbearable. Relief clashed violently with excitement. The son she mourned stood breathing in front of her, yet the years stolen could never be returned. For the city, joy quickly turned into suspicion. No one vanished for 7 years by accident. As the crowds pressed closer, one truth became impossible to ignore. Benson hadn't been found. He had come back, and whatever answer he carried with him was about to change how the city remembered everything. When Benson finally agreed to speak, the city fell silent. He appeared live on local television, calm, deliberate, and unafraid, nothing like the reckless champion many had imagined. He didn't start with apologies. He started with truth. For years before the disappearance, Benson explained, his victories had earned him more than trophies. They had earned him enemies. Anonymous threats came regularly, warnings disguised as rivalry, promises of harm hidden behind bravado. He ignored them at first, believing skill and discipline were enough to protect him. He was wrong. He revealed that the threats escalated into violence. Not once but twice he had been attacked away from public view. Each time he survived narrowly. Each time he reported it to the police. And each time nothing happened. No arrests, no protection, just paperwork and silence. Benson realized then that winning races meant nothing if staying alive wasn't guaranteed. But that wasn't the truth that broke the city. Benson paused before delivering the confession that changed everything. Years earlier, driven by quiet doubt, he had secretly taken his children for DNA testing. The results shattered his understanding of his own family. Of the 3 children his wife had borne, only Jordan was biologically his. The revelation didn't arrive with anger, it arrived with clarity. In that moment, Benson said, everything aligned: the threats, the attacks, the neglect, the betrayal at home. He made a decision not out of cruelty but survival. He would protect the one child that was truly his. He would disappear before his enemies finished what they had started. As the broadcast ended, the city sat stunned. Benson hadn't just confessed to leaving. He had exposed a chain of failures, personal, institutional, and moral, that forced him to choose disappearance over death. Benson didn't ask the city to forgive him. He only asked it to understand. In the days following his confession, he explained his decision with a calm that unsettled people more than anger ever could. Leaving, he said, was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of calculation. Staying meant waiting to be killed. Staying meant placing Jordan in the path of enemies who had already proven they were willing to act. He spoke of the weight of knowing only one child carried his blood, and how that knowledge sharpened every threat he received. Jordan wasn't just his son. He was his responsibility, his legacy, and the one person he could not afford to lose. Protecting him became more important than reputation, marriage, or public approval. The city he once dominated had turned into a cage. There was also the humiliation Benson could no longer outrun. Discovering the truth about his family fractured something inside him. Every race, every public appearance, every smile felt dishonest. Leaving offered distance, from rivals who wanted him gone, and from a life built on trust that no longer existed. While Benson stood firm in public, his wife vanished from it entirely. She stopped appearing, didn't appear to speak, didn't appear to defend herself. Some saw her silence as guilt. Others saw it as survival. Either way, she became another casualty of a truth revealed too late. The city argued endlessly. Some called Benson selfish, cruel, unforgivable. Others called him brave, a father who chose life over illusion. In the end, the question had no clean answer. When danger closes in and betrayal cuts deep, is leaving wrong, or is it the only choice a father has left? After the TV confession, Benson vanished again, not into the mountains, but into a life he had already built elsewhere. The city he returned to wasn't the one he left. It was quieter, less crowded with familiar faces and dangerous rivals. Here, he could breathe without looking over his shoulder. Here, he could train Jordan without the constant shadow of those who wanted them gone. Benson didn't seek the spotlight, he avoided it. His victories were no longer trophies on a wall but lessons in patience and discipline. He taught Jordan how to read the trail, how to respect danger, and how to remain calm when fear tries to take control. Their bond, tested by years of disappearance, became something different, stronger, but guarded. Jordan grew into a young man with a hardened awareness, shaped by survival and silence. In the city they left behind, the reaction was far from over. The discovery of the bikes had reopened old wounds, and Benson's confession poured salt into them. People who once admired him now felt betrayed. Others, who had resented his success, felt validated. And amid the chaos, a new anger emerged toward the police. The public began to demand answers not just about Benson's disappearance, but about the failure of those meant to protect him. Why had his reports been ignored? Why had his threats been dismissed as jealousy? Why had the search dwindled when it mattered most? The police, already under scrutiny for incompetence, now faced a backlash that didn't die with time. Protests, Heated debates and accusations filled the air. Some demanded an official inquiry, others demanded resignations. Even those who hated Benson agreed on one thing: the system had failed. Justice, in the end, didn't arrive in a courtroom. It came through exposure, through the truth that forced the city to confront its own negligence. Benson had survived, yes, but his return wasn't a happy ending. It was a reminder that sometimes the only justice you can get is the kind you make for yourself. Sometimes justice isn't served in a courtroom. Sometimes it's choosing who deserves your protection and walking away from everything else.